The story begins with Danby, a high school senior in her final year. She's just a few days away from taking her university entrance exams, but the problem is, she's terrible at math. She always falls asleep during math class, which annoys the teacher so much that one day he calls her to the board. But as usual, she can't solve anything. Frustrated, he scolds her in front of everyone. When she returns home, she ignores her studies and spends her time playing with her phone and listening to music. Her mom watches her, annoyed, and tells her that if she solved math problems the same way she memorizes lyrics, she'd already be a genius. She jokes that Danby must have inherited her math struggles from her father, who was also bad at it, and that no university would accept her like this. What bothers Danby most is when her mom changes the TV channel to one of those historical dramas she always watches. Danby gives up and leaves the room, heading to her best friend's house. Her friend reminds her once again that this is her last shot at getting into college. If she fails now, she'll have no future, nowhere to go. The next morning, Danby wakes up late and runs out, already behind schedule for the big exam. Her mom encourages her as she leaves, telling her to give it her best so she can get into a good school. Danby is nervous, especially about the math section, but she tries to study on the bus until she reaches the exam center. She jumps off the bus and runs, but forgets her umbrella. As she approaches the exam building, fear takes over. She isn't ready. She starts panicking, thinking about running away instead of facing the possibility of failing. She sits under the pouring rain, heart sinking, silently wishing she could just disappear. There's a shallow puddle in front of her formed by the rain. She steps closer to it, and suddenly, something strange happens. She notices a group of people dressed in unusual clothes, all gathered and praying for rain. They say it hasn't rained in 3 years, and people are dying from the drought. Suddenly, Danby finds herself falling into the puddle and begins to drown. But instead of dying, she re-emerges in the same spot, but somehow in a different world. She's confused and starts asking the people around her if they're filming a historical drama or something. The king, seeing her strange behavior, becomes terrified and yells, asking if she's a demon. She nervously says, "No, I'm just a high school student." But the way she says it sounds like some kind of magical incantation to them, which only increases their fear. Suddenly, guards surround her with swords drawn. When she realizes the swords are real, she panics and improvises, saying, "I know why I'm here. Please God, send the rain." The people repeat her words like a prayer, but the moment they all lift their heads again, she's vanished. She had already run off and kept going until she reached a place filled with ceremonial clothes. She disguises herself as one of the temple priests and sneaks into a gathering with the king. During the meeting, the king suddenly announces that they must stop relying on superstitions and instead study science and mathematics to solve the problems in their kingdom. But the chief priest objects, saying this is dangerous nonsense, that math is just another superstition and it's impossible to understand nature through equations. He claims the real reason for the drought is that the heavens are angry with the king, and that the only way to bring rain is for the king to perform a sacred ritual with the queen. Danby secretly slips out of the meeting and goes to look for her phone, but she gets caught again. While she waits for the king to arrive, she starts thinking maybe she can escape once it finally rains. But the king shocks her by saying that it hasn't rained in 3 years, and honestly, he doesn't like her. He declares that she should be executed immediately. She panics and begs, "Please wait! I'm just a student from the future, and I came here by accident." She tries to convince him that she knows a lot about history, and when that doesn't work, she quickly adds that she's also brilliant at math. Intrigued, the king postpones the execution and tells her to prove it. He gives her a Pythagorean theorem problem to solve. At first, she's confused and says she can't even understand what's written, but when she realizes it's the Pythagorean theorem, she solves it quickly. The king is amazed. He says his own scholars usually take 3 days to solve such a problem. From that moment on, everyone starts treating Danby as Gosam, a male scholar. The king gives her a mission: teach math to the people. If she succeeds, he'll let her return home. But he's the first student, and she's shocked to discover he doesn't even know how to count. She patiently begins teaching him from the very basics: numbers, addition, and subtraction, all the way up to multiplication. Eventually, they prepare for a math contest against a rival city musician. If Danby loses, she'll be punished. She boldly challenges the king and even hits him in frustration when he gets things wrong. The guards rush in, ready to kill her for touching the king, but he stops them and laughs it off. They hide all the math papers whenever the queen visits, pretending to be practicing music instead. One day, the king notices Danby is starving and invites her to eat with him, but she doesn't like the food and takes him to the kitchen. Using ingredients from her bag, she makes him some delicious instant noodles. He loves them, even though they're spicy. When she offers him water, he refuses, saying he likes the heat. The next morning, the entire palace hears him screaming. When Danby checks on him, she sees he's put a protective talisman on his ear, thinking she cursed him. She rolls her eyes and says, "Look, superstar, it was just noodles, not black magic." There was no magic or spell. It was just the chili hitting his stomach too hard. When she told him that, he asked, "What's a stomach anyway?" So Danby sat down and explained to him what the stomach is, what intestines are, and even about the heart, and how if he puts his hand on his chest, he'll feel it beating. But he said, "I don't feel anything." She smiled and said, "It's okay. One day, when you're with someone you love, you'll feel it on your own." He was amazed at how much knowledge she had. He started seeing her as a brilliant scholar, so he asked her to teach all the royal scholars of Joseon, not just math, but everything from science to agriculture. That night, he offered her a tangerine, and she casually said, "Thanks," without ceremony, but he got very upset. "You're a Joseon wanderer. You should have saved that fruit for 3 days at least. You don't appreciate blessings." She laughed and said, "It's just a tangerine. Don't be so dramatic." Later, the two of them went out to play ball in the palace courtyard, and she got him to run for the first time in years. The next day, the king sat with his future bride and told her that he would be served a magical love potion that night in his stew, and after that, they'd be married immediately. But fate had other plans. That bowl ended up in Danby's hands. She started behaving very strangely, and ended up falling asleep in the palace. When she woke up, she kept apologizing to the king, but he simply told her, "Nothing happened, Gosum. Forget it." They went for a walk outside, and he told her that if she could achieve her mission, she would earn a high rank in the council and even be gifted a royal horse. But she said, "I don't want anything. I'm going back to my world as soon as the rain falls." The king replied, "Then from now on, don't treat me like a king. We're equals, man to man." But the next day, disaster struck. Danby was arrested and accused of mocking the king. They tied her by the limbs, preparing to torture her. But the king stepped in and explained to the priests that this young scholar had valuable knowledge. One priest, however, seized the opportunity and said, "Fine, then I must test him myself. He has 2 weeks. If it doesn't rain by then, we'll execute him." Danby didn't give up. She kept studying, calculating everything, and the palace musician helped her build a rainfall gauge. Then, without warning, rain began to pour from the sky. Danby was overwhelmed with joy, but the king suddenly remembered what she said, that she would leave once it rained. He ran to the house where she was staying and found her crying in front of the rain gauge, overwhelmed with emotion. He told her, "You need to escape right now. I've been preparing for this. A ship headed for Ming is waiting for you." But she shook her head. "I've spent my whole life running away. I only ended up here because I was trying to escape my world." At that moment, the palace musician, who had secretly been working with the high priest, arrived. The priest had ordered him to kill the scholar, believing Danby might truly be from the future. The musician told the priest, "If that's true, then he's even more dangerous. We must get rid of him." The musician took Danby and put her on a horse, galloping through the woods until they reached a forest. There, he told her, "I've known for a while that you're a girl, but I'm a decent man. Your secret is safe with me." She explained that it wasn't intentional. The job she landed was offered to a boy, and she had no choice but to take it. Meanwhile, back in the palace, the high priest tried to convince the king that everything Danby had taught them must be destroyed, especially the new written language she was developing. They had to stick to tradition and eliminate the boy's influence, but the king couldn't accept that. He left the palace on horseback, searching for her. Elsewhere in the forest, the guards finally caught up to Danby and the musician. He let her escape and stood in their way, fighting them off until the queen herself appeared, her feet bleeding. She had run all the way there, desperately searching for them. Danby kept walking along the road until she reached a fork and didn't know where to go. Then she remembered something the king once said, that the sun is Joseon's clock. So she followed the sunlight until she reached the sea, and there the king was already waiting for her. That night they sat side by side watching the stars. She told him, "In the future, we don't see stars like this. Only the brightest ones." He replied, "Look now, the only stars you're seeing are the ones you choose to see. But if you stop and look closely, you'll start to see more. Those stars were always there. They just didn't appear until you decided to see them. The eyes see what the heart wants." After a quiet pause, the king confessed that he loved her. He said he wanted to create a new, easier language so common people could learn, not just the nobles. She suddenly remembered something, pulled out her money from the future, and saw his face printed on the currency. That's when she realized he really would succeed. When the king returned to the palace, he announced he would begin paying salaries to those who served the people well. The high priest surprisingly agreed, saying that anyone who benefits the people should be rewarded. "What do you think of Gosam?" he asked, but no one else in the court agreed. They believed Gosam should be banished or even executed. Still, Danby continued to secretly teach the king everything, math, writing, and reasoning, without the priests knowing. One day, while walking through the palace, she found the queen hiding and eating in secret. They had forbidden her from eating too much, so she wouldn't gain weight and ruin her appearance. Danby offered her one of her instant noodle cups. The queen accepted it, and as they ate, they started chatting. From that moment on, they became friends. A few days later, the queen approached the king and told him she knew everything. She had already informed the queen mother too, because the girl, Danby, was supposed to be one of his concubines. Suddenly, Danby found herself being prepared for something she didn't understand. The palace maids were dressing her up and applying makeup. She had no clue what was going on until she realized they were preparing her for the midday rest with the king and that she was to become his first woman. The moment she understood what was happening, she panicked and ran away from the mad people around her. One of the headmaids quickly informed the king that she had escaped on her way to the palace. The king went out to search for her and eventually found her, but he grabbed her by the arm and pulled her into a room. Danby screamed, protesting, "You said we'd stay just friends. I'm only 19. The king chuckled and replied, 19? That means you've got at least 3 years of adulthood. You're not a kid anymore. Besides, I've known you were a girl for a while now. I haven't touched you, have I? But tonight you need to stay here. Everyone's watching. Don't worry, I'm not going to eat you alive. The truth is, my mother's extremely stubborn, and no one can persuade her easily." The next morning, Danby went to speak with the musician. He asked her, "Are you sure you want to go back to the future?" But she didn't answer. She was torn, and her heart was full of doubt. She just walked off and sat alone. After a while, the queen came and told her someone wanted to see her. When Danby entered the palace, she found herself face to face with the queen mother, who looked exactly like her real mother. She completely broke down in tears, and no one understood what had triggered her crying. That night, she went to see the new astronomical system of Joseon, one she had personally helped create. It would help the kingdom accurately track the days and months. The king then invited her to come see something else he'd been working on. He had developed a new alphabet made up of 28 letters, meant to simplify reading and writing so that everyone in Joseon, not just the scholars, could learn. As they walked into the middle of the great hall, he asked her to sit in the ceremonial chair. Then, he placed the royal hairpin on her head, a symbol of marriage, and asked her to stay with him forever. Danby started crying and told him, "I can't. I promised myself I'd go back once the rain comes. My mother is waiting for me, and she trusts me." The king gently replied, "Then go see her, and come back. Let's live here together." But she refused again. He lost his patience and said angrily, "You're right. The future is better than this Joseon, full of sickness and disease. Do whatever you want." Then he stormed off, heartbroken. She remained in the hall, standing still, when suddenly she was struck on the head and knocked unconscious. Someone stabbed her with a sword, and the entire building was set on fire. When the king heard what happened, he risked his life and ran through the flames to rescue her. The next day, he summoned his assistant and said, "The ancient text disappeared last night." He accused the high priest of stealing it. The king grabbed the priest's hand and said, "Did no one teach you to erase all evidence after committing a crime like this?" Then he turned to Danby and asked, "Was this the voice you heard?" She nodded. It turned out that the book in her bag had shielded her from the stab. The king, furious, confronted the priest. "You knew what he meant to me. "Why did you do this?" The priest answered coldly, "Because if that new language spreads, young people will start thinking freely. It'll create chaos. It will destroy the kingdom. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of the disorder that will ruin the future." The king replied, "Even if you try to stop it, I will build this system of writing for the people. I want to be someone who makes their dreams possible. Why should we fear a future we won't even live to see, a world we know nothing about?" But the priest wasn't moved. He fell to his knees and said, "Please, execute me and end this." Soon the sky turned gray and rain began to fall, just lightly at first. Danby went around the palace, saying goodbye to her friends one last time before leaving. The king asked if he could walk with her to the farthest point. They walked side by side until they reached the seashore. There, Danby stepped into the same pond she had once fallen into and allowed herself to sink again, just like before. Moments later, she emerged again, back in her own world. She looked around and realized that only a few seconds had passed. There was still time to make it to the exam. She ran as fast as she could toward the test hall and saw her teacher waiting. The entrance exam had just started. She rushed to her seat and took the test. Later that day, she returned home and found her mother waiting for her. She ran into her arms, holding her tightly. Everything about Danby had changed. Her behavior, her perspective, everything had shifted after her journey. She had learned to value the people and things around her more deeply. Months passed. One day, as she walked out of school, the sky opened up and rain began to fall again. Suddenly, someone placed an umbrella over her head. She looked up and saw a face strikingly familiar. He looked exactly like the king of Joseon. But he simply smiled and said, "We met a long time ago. On the bus, you dropped your umbrella." And that's where the story ends. If you've made it to the end, let us know what you thought in the comments, and tell us what you'd like us to summarize in the next video. Thanks for watching.